Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish, and welcome back to another day of Vlogmas. I'm Marissa, and today I have quite a few books to show you. So during the pandemic, I amassed quite a few books, and I will show them all to you in a little bit, because what better reason to disregard all of your book buying guidelines than a global pandemic? I can't think of a better reason, and books have provided such a solace to me these past months. So I was very good for a long time. I held out buying really any books until July. But come July, I just decided enough is enough. I started working again. I was quite stressed, and I didn't get anything for my birthday this year. So I treated myself to some books and opened the floodgates, and I am just starting to curtail my book buying habits again now. But I am sure that there will be some Christmas book haul in the future because I did put quite a few books on my Christmas wish list. Is that really a surprise? So for the purpose of this video, I have organized the books into 3 sections. I have books that are Victorian in nature, books that are just general American fiction, and I have books that are Jane Austen adjacent, or inspired by the booktuber Heather, who I will link her channel down below and talk about her more in the Jane Austen section. So the first book in this pile of Victorian books is Oscar Wilde's The Canterville Ghost, The Happy Prince, and Other Stories. So I'm a huge fan of Oscar Wilde's comedic plays, especially The Importance of Being Earnest. I've done a video all about that, I think last year, if you want to go check it out and hear more about my thoughts on his comedic plays. But I've never read his short stories or his fairy tales, both of which I believe are in this bind-up. So yes, we have The Happy Prince and Other Tales, which I assume are his fairy tales, as well as A House of Pomegranates, I assume fairy tales as well. And there's also Lord Arthur Saville's Crime and Other Stories. So I am quite excited about reading some new Oscar Wilde, or new to me at least. The next book I have is also a series of short stories, and those are In a Glass Darkly by Sheridan Le Fanu. So I've heard a lot of people talk about this during Victober, and I decided to check it out. I have read 2 of Sheridan Le Fanu's short stories, Carmilla, which I've actually read twice because it's just a fantastic, more feminist, LGBTQ-friendly vampire tale. So if you found Dracula to be sexist and slightly offensive, you might want to check out Carmilla if you haven't. But I also read his short story Green Tea, and I think Sheridan Le Fanu is a very talented Gothic author, and I'd love to read some of his other short stories. So this collection has Green Tea in it, as well as Carmilla, which is great because I don't know what I did with my copy of Carmilla. I may have accidentally donated it. So it's good to have some of the stories that I've already read in here, as well as some stories that I haven't. And then I have some Victorian poetry. I have the poetry of Christina Rossetti, and then okay, so Charles Baudelaire is not exactly Victorian since he is French, but I'm including him in this section because it's the one he fits into best, and these 2 books are from the same publisher, so they go together, and I'm talking about them together. I studied Charles Baudelaire's poetry in college, actually during my freshman year, and I would really love to revisit it. I found his work to be really darkly beautiful, and also a really interesting segue from Victorian period into the modern era. I found his poetry to be strikingly modern for the time period. When was he writing? Yeah, 19th century, but I swear his poems feel very modern. So I can't wait to see which poems are in here that I haven't read yet, and which poems are in here that I am going to revisit. And I've been interested in Christina Rossetti since reading Goblin Market by her, which is probably her most famous work, but I was unable to find anything else by her in the library, so I figured I had to get a little bind up of her poetry to read for myself. Next, I have 2 Anthony Trollope books. I have The Claverings and I have He Knew He Was Right. So these 2 books are standalone works by Anthony Trollope. And Anthony Trollope, I feel like he's known for his series. I have almost finished the Barsetshire Chronicles series. I have 2 left, I believe. And he also has the Palliser series. But I personally have massive issues with committing to series, and I will probably talk about that in a future video. But I feel like series are just giant commitments, and I never know how quickly to read through them, etc., etc. So it's really nice for me to have some standalone works by Anthony Trollope on my shelves. Maybe then I will be able to finish the Barsetshire Chronicles series without worrying that I won't have any more Anthony Trollope to turn to next. I don't actually know much about these 2 books. This one's quite thick, which you can tell just by looking at it. But I think it should be very interesting to read some of his standalones. I have The Way We Live Now behind me somewhere on my shelves, which is another one of his standalone books, which deals a lot with finance and money and truth and scandal and just so much about Victorian morality. It's fascinating. It's wonderful. I love Anthony Trollope. I can't recommend him enough, and I look forward to reading more by him. That concludes the Victorian literature portion of this haul. Now I'm moving on to American literature. And first up, we have Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. This book blew me away this year. It was absolutely beautiful. I was particularly struck with the main character of Janie and the duality of her voice. She has this internal monologue that is so beautiful and poetic, and it's in contrast with her dialect that she presents to the world. And it's just so interesting to see how both of those different voices are her voice, are a part of her, and it's fascinating to watch her journey of self-discovery in this book. I listened to this originally on audiobook, and I had just had to have a copy for myself because I was so struck with it, and I think I should reread it and highlight and annotate this book to death because it is a new favorite of mine. I love the way it looks at the intersectionality of race and feminism, and it's just such a beautiful book. I can't recommend it highly enough. Next up, I have The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams. This is a play, actually. Tennessee Williams is a playwright, and I haven't read it in years and years. I think I read it at the end of middle school, beginning of high school, something like that. And I remember being struck with the way the characters are developed and the way they relate to each other. Specifically, the mother-daughter relationship in the book is fascinating. So I would like to revisit this play. I would like to read some more Tennessee Williams plays because I'm not familiar with some of his other ones. I mean, I'm familiar with their names, but I've never actually seen them or read them, and I should probably fix that considering how much I loved The Glass Menagerie. Next up, we have another book that I've read before, and that is Kurt Vonnegut's God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. So I used to own a copy of this book, and I had annotated it and loved it and read it very carefully. And then I made the mistake of lending it to a coworker in residency, and I'm never going to get that book back. It's okay. I believe my coworker thought it was a gift, and I just didn't have the heart to tell them that I kind of was lending it to them. So here we are, brand new copy. I am pretty disappointed that I no longer have my original thoughts while reading the book, my annotations. I used to annotate a lot more than I do now, and I kind of miss that and would love to revisit my thoughts. But c'est la vie. I have the opportunity to make some new thoughts and reread this book at some point. So I'm glad to have a copy on my shelf, and hopefully that person enjoys my annotations or donates the book and somebody else can find my annotations in the future. Next up, we have yet another book that I've already read. I tend to like buying books that I've already read because I know I love them and I just want to keep them close to me on my shelves and have the opportunity to reread them if the mood strikes me. So this is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I've been thinking about revisiting this book for a long time, and it's nice to have a copy on my shelves that allows me to do so whenever I'd like. Fahrenheit 451 is about a bleak dystopian future in which books are illegal, and our main character is a fireman. But instead of putting out fires, he is responsible for setting them. He is responsible for burning these illegal commodities, for burning books. And when he begins to question his society and his role in society, things get really interesting. This book is all about the power of literature and the importance of books. And because of that, it has stuck with me long term. I can't wait to revisit it, hopefully, in the future. And finally, some American literature I haven't read. We have, actually technically it's nonfiction here, essays of E.B. White. So as a child, I loved E.B. White's work. I read Trumpet of the Swan, I read Charlotte's Web, I read Stuart Little, and I fell in love with the worlds he created and the characters that he brought to life. Even though I love him for his children's literature, I think E.B. White is actually supposed to be more famous for his essays, which I've never read. So I got a nice little collection of them, not so little, rather chunky collection of them, and I can't wait to see what he does with the form of the essay. Let's move on to my love for all things Austen, shall we? In Jane Austen July, I found a wonderful new booktuber, Heather from Fresh Parchment. We became fast friends, and I bought so many Jane Austen books on her recommendation. I also did a book exchange with her, and she kindly gave me She Rises by Kate Worsley. So this book is historical fiction. All I know about it is that it follows two different characters and their stories, both related to the sea. One of the characters is a wealthy captain's daughter who longs to see the world, and another is a sailor who is trying to survive in the service of the Navy. So it seems like a really interesting read. It's giving me major persuasion vibes, even though I don't think it has anything to do with Jane Austen besides being set in the Georgian and Regency era. Next, I have a short story collection by Jane Austen lovers for Jane Austen lovers. It is a series of short stories inspired by Jane Austen's work, and in some cases including Jane Austen's characters. And it's written by various authors. I'm really excited to get to this one. Next up, I have Confessions of a Jane Austen Addict by Lori Vera Rigler. And I have its sequel as well, Rude Awakenings of a Jane Austen Addict. So the premise of these books just sounds too good to pass up. The first book follows a modern woman who travels back in time to Regency England and deals with all of their social conventions and just tries to live her life there. And the sequel is the opposite. The sequel is about a character from 1813 who comes to modern day Los Angeles. And I'm not sure how the time travel occurs in both of these books, but I just kind of love a premise like this. And I think that they're going to be really fun and engaging, quick, lighthearted reads. I also am kind of weird in that a lot of times I wonder, what if my favorite authors or even just historical figures came to the present day? What would they think about today's society? What would they be like when they're exposed to today's technology? That kind of stuff just really fascinates me, and so the premise of these books is really intriguing to someone who daydreams about things like that from time to time. Next up, I have Jane in Love, which was so kindly sent to me by a publisher. It's an imprint of HarperCollins' William Morrow. They've published a lot of books that I really, really enjoy. The premise of this book really interests me. It's also about time travel and Jane Austen. It asks, what if Jane Austen traveled to present times and had the opportunity to fall in love, but she would have to sacrifice her literary legacy in order to have her happy ending. It sounds like a really great premise, like I said, but unfortunately, after the first few pages of this book, I realized that it is not for me. Strict romance is not my genre, and I just didn't feel like the Jane in this novel represented the Jane Austen that I know and love. So perhaps if you like romances, you would enjoy this book. I would say you don't have to like Jane Austen to like this book. And if you love Jane Austen, you may not like this book. Like me, not everything with Jane's name on the cover is gold. Speaking of Jane's name on the cover, my last book is Jane Austen cover to cover. This book is a history of Jane Austen book covers. So it actually chronicles the publication of her novels and how their marketing and cover design has changed over time. It's a really beautiful, lovely coffee table book. It's got these full pages of Jane Austen quotations, as well as a lot of beautiful vintage cover art and really interesting text. This is such a fun read, and I look forward to leaving it out on a table and perusing it at my leisure. So if you're still watching, congratulations on making it to the end of this massive book haul. I would love to hear your thoughts on these books in the comments down below. If you've read them, did you enjoy them? Do you recommend them? If you haven't read them, are you excited to pick any of these books up soon? And also, what makes you purchase a book? I know that it's a really broad question, but I would love to hear your thoughts and answers in the comments down below. For me, it seems like I gravitate towards purchasing books that I've already read and really enjoyed and might want to reread again in the future, as well as books by authors who I've enjoyed in the past and would like to explore more of their works. Until next time, happy reading. I look forward to seeing you in another video very soon. Bye!